Stop scrolling. Because right now, in the middle of a loud, messy trade war season, there's one commodity the US is treating like it's too important to touch. Not oil, not cars, not chips. Silver. And the weird part? Even when politicians are threatening tariffs on half the planet, the US keeps signaling the same thing. Critical minerals get a carve-out. They get a hallway pass. So today we're breaking down the silver secret, why the US won't tax silver imports, even during a trade war. And what that really means for price, shortages, and the next phase of this market. If you stay to the end, you'll understand why silver is no longer just a metal. It's a grid component, a defense input, and a safe haven asset all fighting for the same ounces. Most people think tariffs are simple. Country A gets mad at country B, so country A slaps a tax on imports. Prices go up. Someone wins. But in the real world, tariffs are like pulling a lever in a factory you've never visited. You don't just hit your opponent, you hit your own supply chain. And silver sits in the most sensitive part of that supply chain, electricity. The stuff you cannot pause without breaking everything else. So when a trade war gets hot, the US faces a choice. 1. Tariff silver and punish foreign suppliers. Or 2. Leave silver alone so American industry doesn't get punched in the throat. That's why this topic matters. Because if the US is willing to tariff things that voters notice, but won't tariff silver, then silver is being treated as strategic. Here's the pivot that changed everything. In 2025, silver was formally pulled into the United States Critical Minerals List, which is government speak for a disruption here causes economic and national security damage. Here's how this usually plays out in the media. The headline screams tariffs, trade war, retaliation, but the footnote says exemptions apply to critical inputs. That footnote is where the money is, because exemptions tell you what a country is protecting. And protection tells you what a country is afraid to lose. Steel can be replaced, furniture can be replaced, even some chip components can be redesigned over time. But power reliability, grid stability, military electronics, those are not later, those are right now. So when governments draw up a tariff list, they're basically drawing a map of political targets and industrial dependencies. Silver sits in the dependency column. Let's talk about the 2025 critical mineral designation without getting lost in bureaucracy. The US maintains an official critical minerals list that gets updated as risks change, and in late 2025, that list expanded, adding a group of minerals that suddenly moved from important to strategic. Silver was one of them. Why would silver, a metal people associate with coins and jewelry, suddenly sit next to critical materials? Because the economy changed. We electrified everything. We built a world where every solution is basically more wiring, more connectors, more high-efficiency contacts, more power management, and silver is the premium ingredient inside that electrified world. This designation matters because it rewires incentives. When a mineral is critical, agencies can justify faster permitting, supply chain financing, strategic stockpiles, and special handling in trade policy. It's not just a label, it's a lever. Why silver isn't like steel, think of 2 buckets. Bucket A, tariffable goods. These are items where raising import costs can push buyers to domestic alternatives. Steel, some consumer goods, certain finished products. Bucket B, system goods. These are inputs where a shortage breaks the machine. The grid doesn't care about your politics. A data center doesn't care about your slogans. A hospital doesn't care about your tariff tweet. Silver is a system good. And here's the dirty secret. When something is a system good, tariffs don't create local supply overnight. They create a shortage today. So the US can threaten tariffs on a country and still quietly protect the inputs that keep US factories running. That's not hypocrisy. That's survival math. This is where policy gets surgical. When critical minerals are on the table, the messaging often becomes, we're not imposing tariffs right now. Instead, the government leans into negotiations and supply agreements. Sometimes it even flirts with tools like minimum import prices or price floors to stabilize supply without triggering a supply shock. That approach tells you something. They want the material. They just want the leverage too. So silver ends up in a weird category. Protected enough to keep flowing, but controlled enough to keep the US in a stronger position. What does critical actually mean? Let's translate it into normal language. Silver is the most electrically conductive metal on Earth. That's not a fun science fact. It's a design constraint. When engineers need a contact that stays cool, resists corrosion, and moves power efficiently, silver is the go-to ingredient. Where does that show up? Power grid switchgear and high reliability electrical contacts, solar panels, silver paste and conductive pathways, EVs and charging infrastructure, power electronics, connectors, thermal demands. data centers and high-density electronics, where heat and resistance are enemies, defense and aerospace electronics, high reliability, harsh environments. Now imagine a tariff on silver imports. Every one of those industries gets a cost shock at the exact wrong time, and those costs don't stay on paper. They show up as higher prices, delayed projects, slower build-outs, and political pain. So the U.S. has an incentive to do something quieter, secure supply first, fight later. Why the U.S. won't tax silver imports. Here are the real reasons, stacked together like a case file. 1. The U.S. isn't self-sufficient in silver. Even if America mines silver, it still leans on imported material and imported refining capacity. So a tariff would be a tax on American manufacturers more than a punishment of foreign miners. 2. Silver is upstream of green tech. Washington can argue about climate politics all day, but the grid upgrades are happening. EV rollout is happening, solar build-out is happening, and silver sits inside all of it. If the U.S. wants more domestic manufacturing, it needs cheaper inputs, not more expensive ones. 3. Critical mineral policy is national security policy. Once something is labeled critical, it becomes a vulnerability map. Tariffs are a blunt tool. They can break the system you're trying to defend. So the playbook shifts toward supply deals, stockpiling, allied sourcing, and targeted restrictions on adversaries rather than blanket taxes on the whole market. 4. Trade war optics versus trade war mechanics. Politicians like tariffs that look tough, but the agencies doing the math know where the real red buttons are. Silver is one of those red buttons. Push it the wrong way, and the grid, EV supply chain, and electronics sector all feel it. So, in a trade fight, silver becomes the exception, not because it's nice, because it's necessary. The part nobody says out loud, if you're the US and you tariff silver, you don't just tax raw silver, you tax every solar panel supplier, every EV component producer, every grid contractor, every high-reliability electronics maker that cost travels. It shows up as a higher bid on government projects. It shows up as higher utility costs over time. It shows up as slower electrification. And eventually, it shows up as political backlash. So the rational move is to leave silver imports as frictionless as possible and focus your trade war energy on things that don't risk taking down your own systems. Let me put a simple picture in your head. The U.S. consumes silver through thousands of invisible doors: electronics plants, solar makers, EV suppliers, hospitals, defense contractors. But the raw metal doesn't magically appear behind those doors. A large slice of the silver that feeds U.S. industry is imported, directly or indirectly, because global silver production and refining are concentrated outside the United States. So if Washington slaps a tariff on silver, it's not taxing foreigners. It's taxing American demand at the front end of a supply squeeze. And here's the kicker. With critical minerals, the vulnerability is often not just mining, it's processing. You can dig rock in your own backyard, but if the refining and specialty processing happens abroad, you still have a bottleneck. That's why critical minerals policy keeps repeating the same theme: secure overseas supply and build domestic processing capacity over time. So in the short run, the U.S. needs silver flowing more than it needs tariff revenue. Now, no tariffs for now is not a forever promise. It's a tactical pause. If negotiations fail, governments can pivot to other tools: minimum import prices, a disguised tariff, quotas and licensing, procurement priorities for strategic buyers, or targeted measures aimed at specific countries rather than the whole market. But notice the pattern. These tools try to keep metal moving while controlling who gets it and at what terms. That's the trade war upgrade. Not louder, smarter. When a government exempts an import during a trade war, it's admitting, we can't run without this. That admission creates a quiet price floor, because policymakers will fight shortages before they fight speculators. Silver isn't just a bet on fear anymore, it's a bet on electrification. And electrification doesn't pause for politics, it accelerates through it. That's why you keep seeing no tariff language. It's not mercy, it's maintenance. In a squeeze, priority 1 is factories staying online. Priority 2 is saving face. That's the tell. Watch it. Now here's the part investors miss. This makes silver more resilient than many other commodities during a global trade spat. If you tariff a commodity that has substitutes, demand can shift. If you tariff a commodity that is optional, projects can delay. If you tariff a commodity that is nice to have, buyers can wait. But silver is often must have. And when supply is tight, must have turns into pay whatever. That's why you see strange behavior in silver markets: sudden surges, violent pullbacks, inventory hoarding, premiums that detach from the paper price. In other words, the market doesn't move like a normal commodity anymore. It moves like a strategic material. So if the US won't tax silver imports, does that mean it's doing nothing? No. It means the strategy is changing from tariffs to control. Think about it like this. Tariffs are a toll booth. Control is a border checkpoint. A toll booth says, you can come in, but pay more. A checkpoint says, who are you? What are you carrying? And where is this going? With critical minerals, governments prefer checkpoints. They prefer targeted tools, negotiations with trading partners, security reviews, import adjustments under national security authorities, incentives to shift refining and processing away from fragile choke points. That's why you can see public messaging like, we're not imposing tariffs for now, we're securing supply. It's not softness, it's prioritization. Now we hit the so what that actually pays you. Silver used to have two personalities. One, industrial metal. Two, monetary metal. For decades, those two sides took turns. When the economy was hot, industry pulled it. When the world got scary, investors pulled it. But now those two forces are pulling at the same time. Industrial demand is not slowing down. Grid spending is not slowing down. Data centers are not slowing down. EV infrastructure is not slowing down. Solar is not slowing down. And at the same time, safe haven demand is rising because global debt is high, geopolitical risk is rising, and trust in paper promises is fragile. So you get a situation where factories and investors are bidding against each other for the same bar. That's the perfect storm. Not a slogan, a structure. And when you combine that with a policy environment that treats silver as critical, the market gets a new floor. Because even if officials want to cool prices, they can't just smash supply with tariffs. They need silver flowing, which means tightness doesn't get relieved by policy. It gets amplified by policy. If you're an investor, stop thinking of silver as a single story. It's not just inflation, it's not just jewelry, it's not just the gold to silver ratio, it's infrastructure plus security plus fear. And when policy starts treating it like a critical input, supply becomes a strategic variable. If you're a business, your risk is not price, your risk is availability. In a world of critical minerals, availability becomes conditional. Priority lanes open for some buyers and close for others. Allocation happens quietly. And if you're just a normal person watching the headlines, understand this. When governments exempt something during a trade fight, they are admitting dependence. That's the tell. That's the clue. Quick reminder, I'm not telling you silver only goes up. Markets can swing, sentiment can flip, paper positioning can shake people out, but the structural picture is different now, and that's what smart money watches. If you're enjoying this breakdown, drop a comment with one word. Grid. It tells me you want more of these behind-the-curtain policy mechanics. Here are the signals that confirm the silver secret is real. 1. More official language linking silver to critical minerals and national security. When agencies talk this way, it changes permitting, stockpiling, and import policy. 2. Allied supply deals. If you see announcements about secure supply chains with Mexico, Canada, Peru, Australia, or other partners, that's the quiet move behind the scenes. 3. Inventory stress and physical premiums. When physical demand stays elevated, premiums tell you more truth than headlines. 4. Industrial consumption headlines. EV growth, solar build-outs, grid upgrades, and data center expansion are not stories. They are silver demand engines. And finally, 5. Any hint of export controls or priority allocation. That's when silver stops behaving like a market and starts behaving like a rationed input. So the silver secret isn't that the U.S. likes silver. It's that the U.S. needs silver. In a trade war, the country can afford to tax luxury imports. It can afford to tax political targets. But it cannot afford to tax the metal that keeps the lights on, keeps the electronics running, and keeps the next generation of energy tech moving. And that's why silver has quietly been promoted from commodity to critical. Industrial demand is now competing directly with safe haven demand. 2 engines, 1 fuel tank, and policy is trying to keep that tank filled because the alternative is pain. If you want the next episode, I'll cover the second layer. How critical mineral status can trigger stockpiles, priority supply lanes, and sudden price gaps you don't see coming. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the mechanics. And as always, don't just watch the price. Watch the policy behind the price.